Greetings! So it's been a little while since I've done a video, and I've got a what I believe is going to be a quick, fairly easy project that you can do yourself on my newly purchased 2003 Porsche 911 Carrera 4S, although the procedure should be the same on any of the 996 911s, as well as I think the 997, but for now I'm just going to say the 996. So I have two brand new engine mounts from Porsche. These are the genuine ones. I know there's a bunch of aftermarket options that are quite a bit cheaper, but I found that if you buy a car because you like the way it drives and there's a certain, feel that you like about it, as you start swapping things out for aftermarket, you lose that essence of what the car originally was. So whenever possible, I like to use factory parts, whether it's in brake components, suspension components, engine components, because, well, I trust that they did their research and they picked this particular part for a reason. And the stiffer and aftermarket engine mounts probably are great for track use, although this car arguably was designed for the track and the street. So I figured I'll just go with the engineers at Porsche because I trust them and I think they did a pretty good job. So I'm going to walk you through this step by step. From what I've read, it's a fairly straightforward process. It shouldn't take more than an hour or so, although it might take a little longer because I'm going to be trying to document it. I think the main tools that you need are jack stands, a floor jack, a torque wrench if you want to get really specific, some sockets and extensions as well. So I'm going to keep track of all that as I go through it, and at the end I'll lay it all out or post in the description. I'll also include a link in the description to Pelican Parts tutorial. They've been a great resource when it comes to working on this car. And I'm going to do some quick measurements on the exhaust tips as well, because apparently the number one way you can tell that you need new engine mounts is your exhaust tip sag. So we're going to take some measurements before and after. Apparently it also leads to difficult shifting and a few other symptoms. I can't speak so much to that because I've only had the car for a couple of months. In the first month it was actually up on jack stands as I pulled the transmission, the front differential, to replace the infamous IMS bearing. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, the left exhaust tip is the worst of the two, so I'm going to go ahead and measure from the highest point on the right side, and it looks like about 1.5 inches below the bumper. If we come over to the right exhaust tip, it is significantly better, and it looks like it's about an inch down. So the first step that I'm going to go through is removing the air box. Unfortunately, the previous owner swapped out the factory air box for this aftermarket one, so yours won't look quite like this. Be careful when removing the mass airflow sensor. You don't want to crack any of the connectors on that because I imagine it's not cheap to replace. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I'm sure you can find specific instructions online, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. With the airbox removed, you can clearly and easily see the two engine mounts. So this is the one on the passenger side, and the one on the driver's side is a little bit more obscured, but still easily visible. We might be able to get to them without raising the car. Oh yeah, these engine mounts are very clearly shot. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. Alright, so scratch that. I think we can do this job without lifting the car at all, so we just need the floor jack to support the weight of the engine while we remove the mounts. So stand by while I figure out what I'm going to do next. In order to remove the driver's side engine mount, this emissions pump or air pump has to come out. From what I can tell, it's being held in by a nut, a bolt. It has an electrical connector to it and at least one hose. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this and let you know if I'm right. So this top hose actually just came off with very little effort, which is always nice. There we go. So it appears 10 millimeter is the winner. And remove this top nut. Now I couldn't quite see how that electrical connector comes off, and with these kind of brittle plastic parts, it's better be safe than sorry. So my plan is to remove this enough to where I can kind of manipulate it and turn it around and see the other side. before I snap something off that I'll regret breaking. A couple quick tips. One, working in direct sunlight on a 90+ degree day isn't ideal. However, it's kind of how I parked the car. In retrospect, backing it into the garage would have been a little more intelligent. And the other tip has to do with these gloves. If you're going to be working on your car, I highly recommend picking up a set of mechanics gloves. They save your knuckles, they keep your hands more clean than they would be normally, which is great for if you're running to the computer periodically to check a DIY tutorial or step-by-step or reference the manual. Keeps your computer cleaner as well. So I'm going to go get a swivel adapter for my ratchet so that I can get this last nut. Alright. These are surprisingly loose. This entire assembly seems pretty flimsy. Another fun tip would be to wait until your engine is cooled off before working on it. Some of these parts are actually quite hot still, but the gloves do help. So this appears to just lift out. It appears there was only one hose connected to it and one wire lead. So let's see how this, okay, just, there's little levers on each side you pinch. There's another piece that keeps wanting to come off when I'm pulling on it though. This is just quite a bit of fun. There we go. And okay, it appears this can only go back on one way, so there's no need to mark or note the orientation. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this wonderful pump. Now we have full access to the other engine mount. Alright, so we're under the car at the moment, and I'm going to show you what I was referring to earlier. So you can see right there is the engine mount at the top coming down through a hole in the chassis, or the unibody or monocoque, whatever you want to call it. And the right below that is kind of this bar that goes across, that's kind of the engine cradle assembly. The bottom of the engine mount goes through it, and there's a big 18mm bolt or a nut on the bottom. And it is tough to see, but that black kind of rubber pad is hanging down much further out of the bottom of the mount than it is on the new one. So once I take it out, I will put them side by side, but quick, easy visual reference, and it's clear that this one is shot. So the next step is going to be to support the bottom of the engine, and I'm going to do that using a old 2x10 and my floor jack, and then I'm going to loosen and remove both of these 18mm nuts on both the driver and the passenger side. So at that point, the engine assembly is only going to be supported by the floor jack and the transmission, which has one mount up toward the front. It's important to note here that all I'm doing is taking the weight off of the engine mount so that things don't fall when I remove those nuts. I'm not trying to lift the car, certainly not trying to lift the engine any more than I have to. So just take the weight off with the jack, but don't try to raise it up too much. Now the Pelican article said to use a long extension and an 18mm socket to remove these. Should also note, fun fact, my iPhone has given me a warning saying that I cannot use the flash until it cools down. So apparently it does not like being in direct sunlight either. I'm going to see if I can do this with the camera positioned where it's at. It really doesn't let me see what I'm doing at all. Kind of just going by feel here. Okay, so it appears that you need a deep well. I think it's gonna have to be a deep well 18 millimeter. So, as is very common working on any car, I've come across a tool that I don't have that I need. So I do have a 3/4 inch deep well socket, which is the closest I can tell as far as an equivalent in standard. But I am going to try, although it always makes me nervous, using a size that's slightly too big on a part, especially if it's rusty like this particular nut. We're going to go ahead and try and just see. So it does seem to fit nicely. So those are definitely tight. I'm going to switch from a 3/8 drive to a 1/2 inch drive to give myself a little bit more leverage. Well, I apologize because the camera's in the way. I have to move it. So, sorry about your luck. Oh, yeah, that's tight. It's extremely tight. I'm wondering now if I'm going to need a breaker bar. So it appears that just years of being on there and kind of the heat and a little bit of corrosion has led to an extremely difficult nut to break loose. So, since I do not have a breaker bar here, I'm going to get my jack handle and put it on the end of this 1/2 inch drive ratchet and make my own. Wow, that is extremely tight. Be careful to try not to put pressure on this exhaust hanger, clamp, whatever it is as well. Damn, this extension is bowing. Oh, well, So, it appears I just snapped the head off of this extension, which confirmed my theory that the bolt is quite tight. So, I'm going to have to think about this for a minute. So what has happened is the head of this, and it is a wobble extension, and it's not a particularly expensive one, it's from Harbor Freight. It actually snapped off in this socket. So I'm going to have to knock that out with a screwdriver. In all fairness, I was using a 1/2 inch drive that was extended by my jack handle through a 1/2 inch to 3/8 adapter, so technically this particular tool was never really meant to deal with that amount of torque. However, I've done similar things with Craftsman tools and I've never ever really had an issue, so it's just a matter of higher manufacturing standards in this case, and you can't quite abuse these tools like you can Craftsman. Okay, we're going to try that again. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch drive extension now and an 18 millimeter 1/2 inch drive socket that I have that may or may not be deep enough. I don't know if it will be. Let's see. No, I don't think it's going to cut it. Might be worth a shot. It's not fully seating, which is never a good thing when you're trying to loosen something this tight. Well, clearly don't have a very good angle. Whew. Quite impressed with how tight this is. It does not want to loosen up. And it's not a good spot where I can oil it. But I think I'm going to have to try. Once you break the 18 millimeter nut loose on the bottom, it's actually quite easy to remove the engine mount. So you come up to the top and there are two bolts. One goes here, the other one over there in that darker area. They're both 13 millimeter. You just loosen them and then the engine mount is free and you lift it up and out. Careful not to break any of your hoses or mess up your mass airflow sensor line there. Okay, so I got the first mount out, and I can tell you it was an absolute bear to break it loose. In fact, the nut never actually broke loose from the stud. It unscrewed from the mount itself, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get these two separated. In retrospect, if you're going to be doing your rear engine mounts, order new nuts so you don't have to deal with this, because this one's rusty anyway. I'd prefer not to reuse it, but I don't have another one at the moment. I don't want to wait 2 or 3 days for it to come in. So looking at this old mount, you'll notice that the rubber piece is a little crooked in there, and it's pulled out considerably more than it is on the new one. So go ahead and put the new one side by side for comparison purposes, and you can see it's pulled out more. In fact, I'm going to measure them and let's see if it has any correlation to the exhaust hanging down. It looks like the new one, the rubber comes up maybe just more than 1/4 of an inch. Yeah, 3/8. Let's say 3/8 on that one. And then we'll come over and look at this other one, and it's very clearly past 1/2 inch, closing in on 5/8 even. So a little bit of a difference there. This one is from the passenger side, which was the better of the two. So now I'm going to get to work on the driver's side one, and I'll go a little bit more detail about how it came out of the car and show you guys. So I gave up on trying to get that nut off of the stud because it's obviously rusted and it looks like crap, and I figured I'll just use a brand new one. So definitely get new nuts for your engine mounts. I did not do that. I called the Porsche dealer and they had one in stock, so I went and picked it up and ordered a second one. Luckily, I've only taken off one engine mount so far. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the new one with the new nut and wait to do the second one until I have the nut, because I don't want to leave it without the engine mount sitting on the floor jack. Once you've removed the old engine mount, which I've already done, you just put the new one in reverse order. It will only go in one way. You want these holes to line up with the holes in the body. So put it in there, and then as you're putting it in, that stud that goes down through the middle needs to line up with the bracket that actually holds the engine. So you can see it right there coming down through it. You just want to work it into that. Now, if the mount doesn't come all the way down through that hole so you can get the nut started on it, you'll probably have to raise the engine up with your floor jack. Just do it really slowly and carefully and check often until that stud comes down far enough where you can get the nut on it, and then you'll be able to raise the engine by turning the nut. Okay, now that I've gotten the stud lined up with the kind of engine support down there and the nut already started, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall these bolts on the top to hold it in place while I tighten the lower nut. So I've got the lower one just started, but it's not tight at all. I haven't really started pulling it in yet. These will help hold it nice and right where we want it. So the passenger side engine mount is installed and replaced, and I can tell you that visually there is a definite difference in terms of how the exhaust pipe matches up to the body. Just to show side by side, I'll go over to the driver's side, which is still in need of replacement. You can see there's a huge gap there. So just to round everything out, I'm going to measure from the highest point, and it looks like we're now about 3/4 of an inch over here, and I'll have to reference the video to see what it was before, but I believe it's quite a bit more. Tool-wise for this project, I used a low-profile floor jack and a board to put between the oil sump pan and the jack itself. In addition, standard screwdriver for removing the intake, 10mm socket. I use a swivel head as well, 13mm socket, a T5 hex head for removing my intake. I'm not sure, but I would imagine it's the same for a factory intake. It's a 3/8 inch drive ratchet and extension, as well as a 1/2 inch drive ratchet, a really long 1/2 inch extension, and a 3/4 inch deep well socket. However, 18 millimeter would have been ideal, but the 3/4 inch did end up working. If you have a breaker bar, I would highly recommend it. This 1/2 inch drive was not enough. I had to put my jack handle on it to extend it to get the extra leverage that I needed. In addition, you obviously need 2 new motor mounts, and I highly recommend the nuts that go with them. All right, well, aside from those 18 millimeter nuts that I had trouble with on the bottom, this was a pretty straightforward project. It really shouldn't take more than a couple of hours. It's going to take me a lot longer because I have to wait for that second nut to show up, and I had to drive to the Porsche dealership to get the first one. So get the nuts ahead of time and you'll save yourself a lot of headache. Boom, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe.